Hello Flosstube, it's nice to see you back. Thank you so much if you've watched my recent videos. I had Flosstube a couple of weeks ago, and then also I did a review of what's it called, Punch Needle and Primitive Stitcher magazine. So if you didn't get to catch that, either of those, if you're interested in them, do go back and have a look. I'm back again. So what is this? I think it's maybe 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks since I did my most recent Flosstube, which is pretty amazing, since before that it was about 6 months. So hooray, thank you. I think I've had a few new subscribers. Thank you so much. It's nice to have you join me here. I also have a thank you to say before I forget to Michelle of Mama Loves You GB. I, if you remember last time, had been asking whether anyone knew of any exchanges for cross-stitch projects, particularly exchanges that were based here in the UK or possibly in Europe. And I left a comment on one of her videos asking if she would ask her infinitely larger subscriber list whether they knew of anything. A couple of people left comments saying they didn't know of anything but would be really interested in finding out about something. So I have found out about something. I will tell you about it later in the video and put links down below, but there are exchanges happening in the UK amongst cross stitchers. That is the sort of headline news, and thank you so much to Michelle for asking about that. Right, now I'm going to start with things I have finished and fully finished since last time, and there is a surprising number. I was quite surprised myself when I counted it up, and certainly if you've been used to watching my videos, you will be surprised at how many there are too, I think. So first, things that I was teasing you about last time. So last time I had finished the stitching on this, but I had not fully finished it. So this is Life is the Most Wonderful Fairy Tale. I hope you can see that. Life is the Most Wonderful Fairy Tale, which is more or less a quote from Hans Christian Andersen. His quote was, life itself is the most wonderful fairy tale, and I have just missed out the itself. And it's illustrated. There's a Red Riding Hood, there's an Aladdin's lamp, a frog prince, some bluebirds coming round. What can you see? There's a Puss in Boots coming, 3 little pigs, and Hansel and Gretel's house. And on the top I did a mushroom or a toadstool with a little fairy. This is my own design. I'm not planning on publishing the chart. It's not stitched. So I did draw up a chart. It's not stitched according to chart. I made lots of changes as I went along. I didn't chart the colours. I just picked colours out of my stash as I went along that I thought I'd like. So there's, you know, about 150 different colours in here. It's not designed with an eye to other people stitching it, shall we say. Now, what it is designed with an eye to was to fit precisely on the underlying form of this. And you will remember, if you saw this last time, this is a Pringles can. This is an ordinary 1-person sized Pringles can. I wiped it out very carefully. I didn't wash it because I didn't want it to get wet and soggy and lose its shape, but I used a wipe to get out all of the salty greasiness from the Pringles. And then I covered it. So I had designed the cross stitch so that it fitted exactly. And I don't know if you can see, that is the seam. And I stitched the seam by hand from the wrong side, but very carefully lining up stitch by stitch all the way up the seam. So you can see that there's a seam, but also the pattern continues across the seam. So it is a kind of infinite pattern going round and round the whole can. So I stitched that and dry fitted it to make sure it fitted on the can as I'd planned, which it did. It's interfaced, but not lined. I had thought I might put just some plain white paper, glued that on around the can, but actually when I tested it, you can't see the Pringles can through the interfacing in the cross stitch, so I didn't bother. I guess if you were maybe using Ada or something with a larger count, this is 28 even weave, and with the interfacing it just doesn't show at all. So that worked out. Then I lined the inside with this. I wanted to choose a lighter coloured fabric so that it's easier to see inside, and that is just glued on. I am not good at gluing, and the gluing on the outside is not, on the inside is not perfect. And because I know I'm not good at gluing, I did want to try and stitch as much of this as possible. So even though this fabric is glued on, it is whip stitched at the top to the cross stitch fabric from the outside, and that gives a really nice neat finish around that top edge, I think. On the inside I then just glued that lining fabric down to the base, and then I made a separate little pin cushion. That's just from some plain bright pink fabric that I had in my stash. It is filled with walnut shells. It's got its own sort of circular cardboard base that it's glued to with the fabric wrapped around that, and then it's glued. Do you know, I don't think it is even glued inside. It's just that it was such a tight fit, it doesn't come out. I think I put it in as a sort of dry run test, and then it didn't come out, and I'm like, well, it can just stay there. It doesn't need extra glue, obviously. So that's the inside. On the rest of the outside, that's what I put on the bottom. So if you think about a Pringles can, or if you've got one handy, they've got a little rim at the bottom. So there's a bit of a gap there. And obviously you could just put a circle of felt or fabric and glue that on top. What I chose to do is I had this lovely fabric with this fox on it, and I just thought it's quite nice to have something that's a little bit of the dangerous aspect of fairy tales, perhaps. So I cut out a circle of cardboard, covered it in batting, and then covered it in the fabric and glued that on to the bottom. I was going to stitch it to the fabric at the bottom, but there is just too much glue, so I've not done that. For the lid, again, this is sort of 2 or 3 layers of cardboard. I didn't have any really firm solid cardboard, so I used 2 or 3 layers of cardboard, covered in batting. I'd interfaced the cross stitching, and then I just gathered it onto the bottom, and then I made a second piece, again with 2 or 3 layers of cardboard, covered with batting, a scrap piece of the even weave gathered around that, and glued the two together. And that gives, it's not the most stable of lids, like if you hold it upside down it comes off, but it gives it enough that it doesn't just come off the edges. The sort of bit that sticks up holds it in place. So that's all it is. It's just designed to sit on the side near where I'm stitching. It doesn't need to be the most secure lid in the world. And the other thing that I did on the lid before I glued this on is I stuck a magnet under the even weave, so you can't see it, and it's actually quite hard. You can just about feel it, but it's hard to see there. And then I've put my needle minder on top of it, and that holds my needles inside the pot. That is a needle minder from Caterpillar Cross Stitch, the little gingerbread man. So it's got pin cushion. It fits in this covered tape measure, which is from the same line of fabric that I've used in the lining. This is Jules, have had a line of quilting cotton that they sell via Hobbycraft in the UK. I don't know if you can still get it. Within the last 12 months I've bought this, so you might be able to. So the little tape measure sits in there, and then these are my little Kohana thread clips, tiny little thread clips like this, sit in their little pocket to the side. So I've got pins, needles, tape measure, clips, all in my little pot, and I am very, very pleased with it. There are 2 things which I think I might do, or I maybe should have done. You'll see that vertically this doesn't quite line up. There's this gap at the bottom. And that is because when I was designing this, I designed the pattern so it would fit between the rim of the Pringles can. And then for some reason, when I was attaching it, I was like, no, I've got to have the top right at the top. So inevitably, there's a gap at the bottom. And what I think I'm going to do is I've just looked through my stash and found this ribbon. Hope you can see that. It's just little flowers in a sort of folk art kind of pattern. And I think it will fit round the bottom like that. And it's the right sort of colours. It's not absolutely perfect, but I think it's the right sort of style and the right sort of colours and the right sort of size. And I think that will look better than having the weird gap at the bottom. The other thing I wish I had done, before I glued these two parts of the lid together, I wish I'd put some rickrack in there so that it would have stuck out coming around like a little flower. Didn't do that. There is plenty of this ribbon though, and I am just wondering whether, let's get that out of the way, whether I could make it work to do a little sort of rosette round the edge like that. I'm not sure. It might be beyond my gluing skills. I might need to try and sew it, and it might be beyond my sewing skills. And it may just be that it's a thing that would have been good to have been done before I finished it and isn't really going to work now. So I don't know, but I think I'm definitely going to do the ribbon around here. I think that will look nice. So basically a fully finished object with a final touch that I'm going to add. Right, what else? Wilbur. You've seen Wilbur. I think I'd finished the stitching last time I showed you Wilbur. Wilbur is now completely finished and he now looks like that. Spot the difference. So this is Wilbur. He's a pattern from Teresa Kogut. And I mean, he is just the most adorable pig in the world, I think. He's absolutely lovely. I stitched Wilbur not using the called for colours, and I sort of did a conversion just as I went along, really. And I wasn't completely happy with all of the colours I'd chosen to use. And so I just thought he needed, so these sections here and sort of around his forehead were quite yellowy, and this section on his chin and wherever else that thread is used was a bit too grey. And I also, although I really liked my choice of fabric with these sort of whitewashed boards, because of the way the design went, the kind of grunginess of the pattern was all sort of here on the fabric, and therefore it doesn't really show on the finished design. It's either covered up by the pig or it was cut off on this corner. So I had a plan, which I sort of executed and then completely gave up on halfway through. And the plan was that I was going to tea dye Wilbur, and I used some strong tea, and I put in it a few drops of rose food colouring gel, which is pretty strong. If you're using liquid food colouring, you maybe need more, but the gel is very strong, so I didn't use a lot. And so it comes out, as you can see, this sort of pinky browny colour. And I actually really like what it's done to the stitching. I particularly like what it's done to the very yellow areas. I think they've come out much more sandy coloured. You know, pigs are not like bright pink. They are this sort of sandy colour edging towards pink, and I think that works really well. I think the grey is still a little bit greyer than I would like, but there's nothing I'm going to do about that now. So that was the plan, was I was sort of going to dye him and then maybe grunge up the outside a bit. Anyway, I ended up just soaking the whole thing in the same colour dye. So that's why the whole thing has got this kind of slightly pinky brown tinge to it. It's fine. I mean, it's more than fine. I really like it. I do wish perhaps that I'd been a bit more careful to not make it quite the same colour so that he would stand out a bit more against the background. But I think the whole thing looks very farmyardish, very grungy, very sweet, and I love him. So that is Wilbur, and he's completely finished and he's ready to go on the wall. But there's more. I finished another thing. This is something that I have started and finished since the last video, and it is this. This is the Gnome biscornu from Tiny Modernist. Tiny Modernist has got a whole load of just adorable biscornu patterns in her Etsy shop. And this is the one that I chose. The fabric is green peas, cashel, 28 count cashel linen from XG Designs. It was a sort of an off-cut piece that was pretty much exactly the right size that I needed for this. This is what I've got left of it, which will be enough to do one or two things for my little mini animals collection, so that's fine. It is not perfectly stitched. I will just tell you that now. The first gnome, which was the blue one, almost completely perfectly stitched following the pattern. Not quite, but almost. After that, it diverges further and further every time. I did make the decision that I didn't want to stitch the same colours every time. So all the gnomes have got different coloured jackets. There's blue and yellow and pink and green. We've got different coloured flowers in the centre. And also they've got different coloured eyes and different belts. So the eyes are green and blue and brown and grey. And then their belts have various different combinations as well. So that was quite fun. Oh, and different coloured boots. Some of them have brown and some of them have grey. So I really enjoyed that, picking different colour combinations each time. I matched the eyes of the snails to the eyes of their gnome. I mean, yeah. Anyway, the flowers and leaves, I couldn't be bothered to count, so I just did different things every time. I was fine with that. On the bottom, so you stitch it in two halves, this square with all the gnomes, and then you stitch this square of fabric where the corners kind of come up, and this is how you get the 3D shape, is you stitch the two squares together but offset. So you've got a square and a diamond and they interlock to form the shape. And this on the chart was just a flower pattern. So the flower that you can see in the middle with flowers either side that, excuse me, match the ones that you get on the front. But the thing I liked best about this pattern were not the flowers, I liked the mushrooms and the snails. So I charted something for the bottom to include a little mushroom and a little snail. And I think that worked out pretty well. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Like I said, it's the first time I've made a biscornu. I'd never done the stitching together like this, and I think it gives a really neat finish. So you do an outline square of back stitch on both the front and the back, and then you whip stitch the back stitched lines together as you go around, and it gives this really nice neat finish, which you can either choose to do, I guess, in a sort of matching colour to the fabric, or like I've done here with a contrasting colour. And you can also, sometimes people put beads along that stitched edge as well, which I didn't bother with. This is stuffed with, let me go and get it. I'd forgotten I had some tea. It's not quite cold, but nearly. I stuffed it with this. I've seen recently a few people on Flosstube talking about stuffing pillows and pincushions and that sort of thing with merino wool, and my heart slightly sinks at that. I mean, you can buy washed, carded merino wool for not terribly much money, I guess. But also, you can use that wool for amazing things. You can spin it and knit it and dye it and do all sorts of things with it. And I couldn't bring myself to put merino wool just as a stuffing in a little biscornu. I just couldn't. But anyway, this is wool. I'll tell you where this came from. Occasionally I buy frozen food in sort of batches from a lovely shop called Cook. I like to have a handful of ready meals in my freezer at all times for the days where I'm just too tired. And if I don't have a ready meal, dinner will literally just be chocolate and crisps. And they send their frozen meals well insulated. And one of the things they use for insulation is this. And this is the kind of wool that can't be used for fabric, not just for garments, but even for carpets or things like that. It's the sort of stiff wool, it's the guard wool, it's occasionally it's got little bits of hay or straw in it, but it's basically clean. It's not, you know, yeah, it's not dirty at all. It smells quite sheepy, but it doesn't smell. And it's just lightly felted together, and it's designed to be used for insulation. So I save this when those come, and then you can just sort of rip it off like this, like you would with any kind of filling, and get it into nice little clumps and balls. And that is what I've used to stuff this. So it's cost me nothing. I mean, if you know a farmer, anyone who gets their fleece processed, this is the sort of offcut of the processing that has no resale value at all. I've also used it sometimes as mulch in the garden. It works really well for that because it, you know, will degrade, and it's a perfectly natural fibre to do that. So that is just my top tip. I mean, if you've got to use merino wool, just don't tell me. But if you've got any access to this sort of thing, it's sometimes sold as house insulation, and it works perfectly well for that. You might have to buy enormous quantities of it though if you're buying it in that context. Anyway, I just thought I would share with you that's what I have used and will continue to use for as long as I have some around. So that is my 3 fully finished objects, but I've got another finished piece. This is a start and finish. I only started it this morning, but I've already finished, and it is this. Oh wait, no, it is this. So this is inspired by a piece in the most recent edition of X-Stitch magazine. I am going to do a review video for X-Stitch magazine because I think it's another one that I don't see loads of people talking about, and I don't really know why. I think it's very cool, really interesting, really quirky. So anyway, their most recent issue was under the theme of mystery, and this is one of the little patterns that's included. The pattern in the magazine is just this big question mark in the middle. And I stitched that, and then I was like, I want to do more of this. And it's so clever. It's charted this way round. So this is the front of your stitching, and that's where it all looks neat. But obviously you don't see the question mark until you look at the back. And so there's a little challenge. Are you willing to show people the back of your work? And I thought it would be fun if it was stitched in the most variegated floss I could find. So this was the most variegated floss that I had to hand. This is from Steph Francis. I don't remember what the number is, and it's not got its label anymore. But it's got orange and yellow and green and a bit of brown. And I ended up stitching it. I thought, oh, I'll stitch this really messily so it's got lots of coverage on the back. And then I ended up, anyway, stitching it as neatly as I ever stitch. And then I just thought, oh, it'll be fun to do several more question marks the same way, back to front, and do some of them really messily and some of them really neatly and so on. So I sort of charted out 2 or 3 smaller cross stitches and stitched them in different kinds of threads, some of them with 2 strands and some of them just with 1 strand. Some of them more variegated than the others. One of them I've just done in back stitch, one I've done in cross stitch and then outlined it in back stitch. And then on the back, some of them are more mysterious than others. So you can see this is quite neat, this purple one. This one over here where I was just doing the back stitch, I don't know what was going on with that thread, but it was in an absolute tangle. And I just thought, actually, I'm just going to leave it because that's sort of the point, is the back of your work sometimes doesn't really match the front, and sometimes it matches the front a lot better. So I'm not absolutely sure what I will do with this. It might go in some kind of cross-stitch journal book. It might get a little mini frame. I don't know. I really had fun stitching it. So that was that. The other thing that I have worked on in this last couple of weeks is a Saviour's Praise. So this is a sampler chart. It's an original, not a reproduction sampler. It's by Teresa Vanette of Shakespeare's Peddler and Kitten Stitcher. I have got the chart, printed chart. I did buy the floss pack, DMC floss pack, but I'm not using it for this, I'm using my own colours to make it just brighter and fresher, really, are the colours that I wanted. It is on my floor stand, and I'm not going to move my floor stand to show you. My floor stand is quite old. It's not as old as me, because I remember it used to belong to my aunt, and I remember when she got it. But I was quite a young child, I think, when she got it. Maybe less than 10. So I would say it's at least 40 years old, and maybe more than that. And when she downsized, she asked me if I would be interested in having it. And I said, yes, of course I would. So it came disassembled in its original box with the original instructions. And it sat in my wardrobe for several years until I started a project. And I thought, actually, I could really do with a floor stand for this. Oh, wait, I have a floor stand. So I got it out, and it wasn't in brilliant condition. Some of the screws and nuts and bolts and things were a bit stiff, and some were a little bit rusty. And so I ordered some new ones of the right size, and I put it together, and it's just quite wobbly. And I think that's partly my incapability, and partly I think some of the wood has worn away and maybe warped a little bit. So anyway, it's fine for stitching. I can sort of get it in front of me where I need it to be, and one side of it rests on the arm of the sofa, and the other side I sort of rests on my knee, or I hold on to it, and it works for stitching. But I don't like to move the frame very often, because every time I move it I feel like it's going to fall apart. Anyway, I will insert some pictures because there has been some progress on this. I came across the sampler on one of Laurie Holt's videos, and she had been doing it as what she called her Sabbath stitch. Now, I thought that was a really brilliant idea, and I thought I'd love to have something that's a specifically Christian thing that I'm stitching on, that I could stitch on Sundays as part of the Lord's Day, and so that's why I started it. I found that in practice I don't really do a lot of stitching on Sundays, so what I actually use this for at the moment is while I'm listening to the Bible in the mornings. I'm doing a Bible reading plan at the moment called Same Page Summer, which takes you through the New Testament and Psalms. I have it on an app. I listen to David Suchet reading it. Each day is maybe 15-20 minutes, something like that. And this is what I stitch on while I'm doing that. So it's a little bit like a 25/7 project, something that I do not absolutely every day, but most days for a short amount of time. And I'm, seeing progress as I'm doing that. And it's really fun. Like I say, I'm doing my own colours, but I haven't done a whole conversion in advance. I'm just picking colours as I go, because it is a sampler with a lot of different motifs. That's one of the things I like about it, is it doesn't have huge amounts of repetition. And so it's just quite fun picking different colours for different sections and different bits of border and different motifs. And then what I'm doing is just keeping the colours that I've used in their own little bag, so that as I go through, I'll have a collection of all the threads that have been used, and I can look through that and see, do I want to use one of these? Do I want to add a new colour in? Will that work with the whole thing? So, we'll see how that goes, but I'm enjoying it at the moment. So that is all my cross stitching. I've got one other thing to show you that I've made, which is this. What on earth is this, you may be asking? And it is a good question, because I've never seen one quite like this. Well, that's not true. I made one like this about 10 years ago, and this is the sort of remake because my old one was falling apart. It's a pin cushion. So I used to have it hung on the wall near where my sewing machine was, and then it would just be really easy to grab pins and needles as I needed them and put them back very quickly. I moved my sewing machine and most of my crafting things out into a hut in the garden. So now it doesn't hang up, and it just lies flat on the table near my sewing machine. And again, I just keep all my pins and needles in there. It's easy to find. It's easy to sort of just grab quickly and to stick things back quickly. The reason why it's like this, when it was hung on the wall, the first version I made, this was just stuffed with layers of batting, I think. Maybe some fibre fill, but I think it was just layers of batting. Anyway, this version, because I had half an enormous bag of walnut shells still left, and I do like walnut shells for pin cushions. I think they're good for keeping the pins and needle sharp. So this is stuffed with what feels like a ton of walnut shells. It's not a ton, it's quite a lot. But since all it has to do is sit flat on my desk, it's fine. And then I mean, there's no sewing to it at all. It's just a picture frame, and this is reusing the same picture frame as before. I'm not going to take the backing off, but underneath this there's just a chipboard, well, just a thick cardboard actually, mount like this. I tape the fabric to it around 3 sides, fill it up with the walnut shells, carefully tape the 4th side down, put it in the frame and put the back on, and then glued the pom-pom trim around the edge. And that's just going to go straight back to my sewing room. So that is that. The other thing that's going to go straight to my sewing room, and again I'll put pictures in of this because it's too complicated to bring it to show you. I've got a new sewing chair. This is a birthday present. My birthday was months ago, but due to COVID and other things, my sewing room has been in an absolute chaos for months, and I just thought I don't want to take the new chair into the sewing room until I've tidied it up a bit. So I tidied it up yesterday, I've swept it. The last thing I had sewn in there was a pink fur jacket, and the previous thing was another pink fur jacket. There was a lot of pink fur all over the place in that room. There probably is still quite a lot, but there's less than there was. So I'm going to take the chair over shortly, but I will insert a picture because I really love this. I think it's such fun fabric. It's also got a handy storage section in it. And unlike my previous chair, which was also a wheelie chair, this one goes up and down, so you can get really comfortable with it too. It's also a bit more compact than the previous chair that I'd had. So I'm really pleased with this. I think I'd seen it online somewhere, and I put it on my Amazon wish list, and my mother bought it for me from Amazon for my birthday. So that is where I will put a link to it, but you probably can find it. And it comes in other colours as well. Mine is the sort of aqua turquoise colourway. I think it comes with a white backing to the design and maybe a black backing as well, something like that. Anyway, check, there are different colourways, so you might find another one that you like. So that is what I've made. That is what I am making. I am about to start on something. So I am going to do a couple of mini animals on the rest of that green fabric. I've talked to you before about A Year in the Woods Jackrabbit, which I'm going to do, but that is not going to be my next project. My next project is going to be from World of Cross Stitcher magazine. And I really like it. And I just wanted to say, you know, I did that review of Punch Needle and Primitive Stitcher, and I talked quite a lot about how different it feels from the sort of ordinary magazines, certainly that you get here in the UK, in supermarkets and newsagents and so on. And that isn't to say that I don't like those other magazines. I find some of what they print I would never stitch, but I think that's true of every magazine. That, you know, there are plenty of things in Punch Needle and Primitive Stitcher that I would never stitch. When I do the X-Stitch magazine review, there will be plenty of things in there that I would never stitch, but there are things I would stitch, and that's true of other magazines too. And so this next thing that I want to show you that I plan to stitch is from, I think it's the most recent issue of World of Cross Stitch, and it's this. It's by Doreen Jones. There's actually 2 designs there, and I'm going to explain to you what my plan is. One of them, this sort of bigger one here, Cross Stitch Stash, is designed to go onto the front of a canvas bag that you might use to carry around if you're going to a cross stitch retreat or just taking your cross stitch on holiday or whatever. And then the other design, this one here with the hoops, this is a repeating design. Let me see if there's a picture that shows you that more clearly. Not really. Oh yeah, no, there is, but it's got the chart all over it. Anyway, it is a repeating design, and you're supposed to stitch it 3 times in a row. And then it becomes, you can just sort of see at the corner there, a roll in which you can store full skeins of cross stitch thread. So you stitch elastic in it and you make little pockets and you can put cross stitch thread in there. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to change it, obviously. So the bigger square is 110 stitches square, and the smaller square that you do in the repeated design is just over 80 stitches square. I want to do them all in the same row in the roll. I don't want to do this as a separate piece, is essentially what I'm saying. I want to do it as part of the same thing. So I'm going to cut that chart down a bit. I'm not going to do my name. I might not do the skeins of thread at the side, and I'm going to rearrange the bottom of the chart a bit so that it is the same height and width as this other part of the chart. And then I am going to make a roll or a sort of folded pocket, but it's not going to just have the elastic in it to hold the full skeins. I want it to have a pocket that you could put in a folded A4 printed pattern. I want it to have a place where you could store a little pair of scissors, where you could store your needles, a little tab that you could attach a floss ring to, so that you could keep those in it, and little pockets where you could put bobbins in. I basically am a mess in terms of how I store my embroidery floss. Some of it's in skeins, some of it's on floss drops, and some of it's in bobbins. So I need something that will allow me to have all of that. I'd also like it to have a sort of fold away thread storage place, you know, for sort of scraps of thread that you haven't used, so that you just, you know, a piece of felt or something, but that it sort of folds out, so you can use it like that and then put it back, so it then doesn't attach itself to everything else in the thing. So yeah, I have quite a complicated plan for this, is what I'm saying. I will not do it, I think, in those colours. I will choose colours from my stash. I was watching a Flosstube the other day, and I can't remember, it might have been the Seattle Stitcher, but I wouldn't swear to that. But somebody who was talking about how she never really changes colours in cross-stitch patterns. And I was like, oh. And she said, well, the thing is, what attracts her to the pattern is seeing the model stitch. And if she likes the colours in the model stitch, that'll be why she wants to stitch it. And, you know, that is a perfectly reasonable approach to your stitching, I think. It's just never been my approach to stitching. I think I see a pattern and I think, oh, but wouldn't that look better if it was in bright pink or purple or this sort of colour palette? And so for me, I always think the design is a sort of starting point, not just because I'm lazy about counting, but also because I want things to look the way I want them. That's why I stitch them. It's like with sewing patterns. You see this in the dressmaking world. There are some people who will always try to find fabrics that are really similar to the ones on the pattern envelope. And I just think, well, I mean, okay, but for me, the point of sewing my own clothes is so that I get the clothes I want. And yeah, so I've never felt like I needed to be constrained by the designer's fabric choices or colour choices. Anyway, what I have just done is ordered, because I thought this would be really fun, particularly on the inside, if it had sort of sewing and stitching themed fabric to make all the pockets and so on. So I've just ordered some fat quarters of Tulip Ink's homemade line and some other things, but we don't need to talk about that. And when they come, I think I'm going to use those fabrics as the basis for choosing my colours. And, you know, there'll be, yeah, brighter pinks and oranges probably, and some blues. I think probably there won't be this sort of purple and raspberry red. And I also thought, actually, for the repeated section, I probably will change up the colours between the repeats as well, so that looks more interesting. But I really like that. It fits with my don't stitch more things to go on the wall where you haven't got room to stitch things category. It is bigger than the small projects I've been doing just lately, but you know, it's on either 14 count Ada or 28 count even weave, and I think I might use Ada, so I don't think it'll be a complicated stitch. It's not full coverage. Yeah, I think it'll be really fun. So that is my next plan. It's called Stitching on the Go Travel Set Project. It's by Doreen Jones and it's in like I say, World of Cross Stitcher magazine, which I get through Readly, which is why it's on my iPad. Good, so I don't think I have much else to say. I've been quite good until just now when I ordered those tulip ink things about not buying lots of stuff, because I have got lots of stuff. I have got, you know, an enormous pile of fabric to make clothes from. I've got plans for cross stitching, so I've got a Save His Praise that's in progress. I want to start on the Doreen Jones and the Jack Rabbit after that, and in the meantime stitch a few mini animals. I don't need new projects for that. I'm really still, my left hand is still struggling, which is putting me off knitting, but I do want to get, I had a summer cardigan that I'd got about halfway through last year before I put it aside in the autumn. So I want to get that out and see how far I am through it, and just try and see whether I can cope with knitting or not. My suspicion is possibly not. Too much touching things with my left hand is what sets it off uncomfortably. So I don't know. I haven't tried dressmaking yet either, but I think that should be all right. Yeah. So that's where I'm up to. If you're in, oh, I know, the cross stitch exchange, that is what I was going to talk to you about. If you're not interested in that, you might as well stop now. I don't think I have anything else interesting to say. So the cross stitch exchange, I joined a couple of UK based Facebook cross stitching groups. I joined, and I will put links to all of these below. There's an Emma Congdon group, which I joined because I'd just been stitching some of those Emma Congdon mini animals, and that's a lovely group. You know, people are stitching obviously Emma Congdon designs, which are all lovely, so that's fun. And then I joined two more general ones. One is Cross Stitch Friends in the UK, and the other is maybe UK Cross Stitch Support Group. Can't remember. Anyway, like I say, I will put the links below. Anyway, Cross Stitch Friends in the UK, it's a big group, it's very active, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of non-cross stitch related posts in there, although they do all have to be labelled as non-cross stitch related, so you know. The moderator is pretty active, I think, and seems very on the ball, and she has created a whole load of other groups. They are private groups, and you can only find the links to them once you have joined the main Cross Stitch Friends in the UK group. And then there's, I don't know, a dozen maybe other groups, some of which are just places, I think, for chatting about specific things. So like a book group, or I think there's a weight loss group or whatever, so that the conversation in the main group doesn't get clogged up with those issues. But there are also other cross-stitch related groups. There's a selling group, there's a de-stash group, and there's an exchanges group. And the moderator organises it, and they are monthly exchanges. She posts them well in advance, so not only are the monthly exchanges for the rest of 22 listed, not only are the monthly exchanges for 2023 listed, but even the monthly exchanges for 2024 are listed, which seems absolutely extraordinary to me. Anyway, you don't have to sign up for the exchange 2 years in advance, and it is kind of helpful to be able to see what's coming. So the June swap, or the July swap, I guess, is the one that people are signing up for just now, wasn't something that I was particularly interested in doing. Not all of the exchanges are finished cross-stitch items. Some of them are exchanging floss or just general kind of care package things, and then some of them are cross-stitch related. So the August one is a biscornu exchange, which I'd really like to do now that I've done my first biscornu. Oh, I have something I was going to tell you about that. One of the things on this biscornu that I'm not going to show you very closely, you know, like the first basic rule of cross stitching is make sure your top stitches all lie in the same direction. Yeah. So I managed that, I think, pretty well, as you. Normally I don't struggle with this. The first gnome and mushroom cluster that I did, fine. And then I turned my fabric round and I just couldn't make my mind up whether I should do them the same way as the first gnome or 90 degrees in the other direction. And I think I changed my mind a couple of times. And so my stitches slightly went a bit skew-if. And the further I went round, the more I was just like, I have no idea which way my stitches are supposed to go. I'm just going to keep going. So that is a question that I do have for you. If you've stitched a biscornu before, should you just do it so that all the stitches are in the same way no matter where they are on the chart? Or do you change it up to fit the direction of your gnome? I mean, it's not always a gnome, but you know what I mean. In each corner, should they look the same? I don't know, there's something about the geometry of it that I got really mixed up with that. Anyway, so I do want to do another one and try and do it better. And I think it would be fun to do that as part of an exchange. And then the September one, I also think I might do. It's just something which is autumn themed. I think it might be autumn or Halloween. So I need to check on that because I don't really want someone to send me a Halloween thing because I don't really do Halloween. Anyway, so yes, Cross Stitch Friends in the UK. And then once you join that, there's a link in the files section that says all the other linked groups, and you'll find in there the link to the exchanges group if you're interested. Good. I think that really is everything. I will be back in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully, with some updates. In the meantime, look out for the review video of X Stitch Mag, and thank you for watching. Do consider liking, subscribing, sharing, following me on Instagram as well as here on YouTube if you like the sort of things that I do, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.